the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to be sitting down today with Dave Rouse, who is the Chief Executive at CarbonClick. Welcome along, Dave.
Thanks, Paul. Nice to be here.
Yeah, look, it's great to catch up again. We were just at your offices a couple of weeks ago, which interestingly was the old spot where Podcast New Zealand studios used to be, where we used to record, and the Gorilla offices. But here we are at our new studios and HQ, and really looking forward to diving in, hearing a little bit about your background in the world of startups and tech, and some of those learnings, as well as CarbonClick, which is the business you're now chief executive of, and it sounds like there's been some really exciting stuff going on that front. Before we start, though, big thank you to our show partners, to Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. All right, so I'm not quite sure where to start, Dave. I guess I always like to sort of go back to the background a little bit. You grew up here in Auckland?
Yeah, I grew up out in the bush, out in the Waitakaris, and then moved to the Big Smoke, which was Titirangi, when I was about 12 years old.
Yep, cool. And, in those sort of younger years, do you have much of an interest in sort of tech, business, and so on?
Not really tech at all. My mum was a naturopath, dad was a merchant banker, so I was very much interested in stocks and learning about how businesses worked. And so, some of my birthdays, I got shares for my birthday and things like that. And through all my school years, I became quite geeky at learning about maybe how to predict what a share price is likely to do based on announcements and things like that. But that was all learnings from my father. Yeah. And then on my mum's side, it was all about, how do we look after ourselves, our health, our environment around us. So they're kind of two very competing views on the world.
Yeah, okay. And so when you finished up school and decided to go off, you went to Auckland University. Tell us a little bit about that. How you decided what to do and what that journey kind of looked like.
Look, I didn't know what I wanted to do. 2 years before uni, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and then just on a whim, I kind of the year before, I sort of decided, no, I'll go into medicine. And then a year into that, I swapped over into engineering and commercial piloting, and a little bit of quality assurance that went with that as well.
Right. So, how did you get from there to working with I guess landing in a place where you've very much been in the world of of entrepreneurship over recent years. So, what did that journey look like?
Yeah. So I guess the journey looked like when I went into the big wide world thinking, right, so I've watched Catch Me If You Can, and I thought that was an awesome lifestyle as the pilots, it was all glorified. I thought, this is cool, and I loved machinery. So I decided, right, this is me. Once I've got my license, I'll just go and get a job and fly planes. And I couldn't get a job because, there's so much competition. So I had to fly in funny places and dodgy planes and that sort of thing to try and build my hours up. But during that course, I thought, there's got to be a better way. Maybe if I get into a business related to that, I'll be able to shortcut that. So I'm not going to spend, I was seeing stories of 10 years of working for poor quality airlines and seeing life flash before my eyes too many times to get into the nice planes. So I got into a business with quality assurance, and that was my first experience at business, and I really loved it. We ran a contract for an airline, and part of that gig was to be able to get time as a first officer and flying bigger planes, and that was kind of an entrepreneurial way of bypassing the system, getting straight to the point of where I wanted to be in a tenth of the time. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the hustle. I enjoyed from the auditing perspective, I got to learn a lot about the internals of how an operation worked of that size.
Yeah,
and that was
great.
actually more fascinating for me than the flying. So I started doing a bit more of that auditing on the side in different businesses, and just learning what works and what doesn't in a company at an operational level. And then the airline that I was, doing this work for, they went bust. And so I was left at a point of deciding what I'm going to do next. And of course, one of my hobbies that I loved as well at the time was racing. So I thought, right, so if I get an automotive workshop and get a tax deductible pit crew that can be fixing my car all the time, I'll be able to get into racing. And, that's not quite how the real world works. But when you're young 20s, dreams are free. So again, I got into that. I saw opportunity for disruption and doing things quite differently, niche specializing, and we did really well, but I didn't get into racing at all because I was so busy and consumed with trying to run a business. I forgot why I got into it to begin with. and then I really decided I want to have a go at franchising. So I got into, I bought another one and bought a panel and paint shop, and then started building my way up there. And before I knew it, I was, in pretty deep in an industry and becoming a subject matter expert in an industry that I'd really had very little time in. And, winning awards, particularly environmental awards as well, carrying through some of those, I guess, learnings from my mother and things that really mattered to me, social and environmental responsibilities. So I enjoyed that. I learned a really valuable lesson along the way because I'd, worked hard for about 5 years without a holiday, really. And, my missus at the time was sort of, it's either us or the business, and we got to take some time out. So we took a year off. I appointed a GM, and the GM tanked the businesses into the ground, all the business. So, so 9 months into the year off, I got served a notice by Interpol, actually, that tracked me down in Croatia and said, you've got a stat demand for the New Zealand courts. So there I was back on the next flight home to figure out what had happened and try and unravel all of that. So some big learnings for me along that part of the journey of, I should have just sold when the steam had run out. Business was in a good position that it could have sold and it would have been attractive to somebody to take on. But things don't run themselves. Much as we like to think that they do, if the passion's gone or you're going to be physically removed from a business, that was an early learning from me. Just don't expect the business to be in the same state if you're not going to care for it.
Be actively involved.
But hey, I learnt enough of those lessons. I picked it back up a little bit, enough to sell, and decided, it's time for some different things. So I got into a number of different businesses, but basically buying into them, building them up, and then exiting them once they're running right. And I started getting more and more systemized as to how I was doing this and making more and more money at each time and taking bigger gambles, really.
And so
at each time.
And what was the role of technology in these things? Because you got quite involved in technology along the way. How did you, how were you using technology in these businesses?
So the big thing that I was noticing through these audits that I was doing is that businesses were relying too much on humans, and humans make mistakes. And there's a big opportunity to cut humans out of a lot of that process, or use technology to support the humans to do those processes better. I wasn't trying to replace everybody's jobs. I was trying to grow the business in a more scalable way. So, even in the workshop days, I actually worked with, there was a Sam Orion Systems back then was the name of it, but it was an automotive workshop program, and that needed a lot of refinement, UX refinement. And so we actually employed one of the developers working on the system to come and work in our workshop every Saturday, building that system and showing him how we could make things much better in the real world, and how we could make the flow work better with how mechanics actually do their job and customers actually interact with the platform. And back then you could have camera recognition on number plates so that people at the front desk could greet people on their first names and say, you're booked in for this, here's your loan card, good to go. And it's, all the paperwork's automated. So back then I really got a kick out of all of that, and it just made such a great customer experience because everybody felt like your friend when they came in, and you just knew what was going on. And so all businesses from that point I'd kind of seen or had a look at what was possible, using technology to automate all of the processes that we could, and really, at the very least, provide a safety net on every process that we could.
Yeah, that's pretty important, isn't it? Because when you're dealing with vehicles, if you miss out an important step, then that could kill someone, right? And it was sort of worst case scenario, or and every single organization has things that are really, really important to do. So if you can use the technology to help lift up your consistency, that's helpful as those other elements in terms of your customer experience and bringing up productivity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also from the diagnostics perspective, sometimes you go down a rabbit hole of assuming something's going to be wrong. So you follow a process expecting an outcome, and it's not actually what's wrong. And that was a big problem in the automotive industry, as comebacks. So people would say, "Hey, I've got a funny noise," and somebody would say, "Oh, that's your flux capacitor. No problem. I'll put another one in." And then they come back a week later, it's still making the funny noise, and you're like, "Oh no, what do we do here?" So that's where we would go through, this is kind of my quality assurance hat coming on. Have we actually checked everything properly? Have we confirmed the diagnosis or made an assumption? And sometimes you can't replicate a problem in the workshop. So you've got to take some guesses sometimes, and that can be a nightmare as well. But more often than not, there's a system and a process and a logical flow that can cut out a lot of that heartache that customers were dealing with having to come back and get something fixed again. And regardless on who has to pay the bill for it, somebody has to pay for that inefficiency.
Yeah. I think that the quality assurance sort of side is probably a challenge that goes sort of far and wide across lots of different sectors, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's what I found is coming into just about any business. If I could set up the systems, processes, and quality assurance, and I could get the all of the HR taken care of. So all the contracts are designed, and the bonus systems are designed around the KPIs that meet the company goals, and those company goals are really well communicated, top to bottom, from whoever's sweeping the floor to whoever's cutting the deal. That was really important, and it was missing out of most businesses that I went into. It's just people had evolved into doing things and they forgot why they were doing things.
Oh, that's fascinating. So what was next after selling out? That was Auto Clinic Group, was it?
Yeah, that was going back a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a number of other businesses since then, from seafood exports, half-shelled mussels into Korea, through to a skin cancer clinic, through to all sorts of weird and wonderful things along the way. But ultimately,
and did those same sort of threads continue in those businesses, or were there other big things that also sort of came in along the way?
Increasingly software and technology along the way, and finding, even in the skin clinic, we found that the software available, none of it really was ideal. So we found a Kiwi software provider that we could work with, that had maybe 30% of the market in New Zealand, 30% of the GP market. We could work with them to refine their product. So we were building integrations into online booking systems and things that they didn't have before. And we would, cut deals with them. We'll 50% fund this because we're going to see the return on investment, even though all of their customers are. So that's the kind of attitude I've taken with every business is you've got to have things automated properly and robust.
Yeah, so good. And so often, by the sounds of it, the businesses that you were hitting, you were finding that there were just really big gaps in terms of how well they were leveraging technology.
Yeah, great people in the business, often just not given the right incentives, controls, and support to be able to prosper. And really, it's that the people in the business that make all the difference. But if you can put them in an environment where they've got the systems that really support them, then, that's half the battle.
I've noticed, across a range of organisations, but especially in New Zealand where we have so many sort of smaller to medium organisations where skill sets are quite and people are quite stretched, that often the technology sort of sits as sort of the last thing that gets thought about in terms of taking a business forward. Has that been your experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. And the bigger and the more mature the business, usually the worse that it is. So there was an engineering company that I bought into, and 25-year-old solid engineering company. They were doing about 40% of New Zealand's gas chlorination systems and servicing for all of basically the councils around New Zealand, the tap water that you drink. And they had an old system that was built on top of patch and patch and patch. And it was so messy in the background that we just couldn't get accurate reporting and data out of it and measurement. You'd run different P&Ls, and it depends on which way the wind was blowing as to what what the story was that it came out of there. And so that was something that we spent a lot of time and money investing in, and we had to patch it up properly first, just to get it working, to be able to remodel it outside of that system. And that was some of the headaches that you encounter when you take on a legacy kind of business. But unlocking that, as well as some other systems and processes, we kind of grew to 85% of the country's gas chlorination within just under 2 years. So it's like you can really take the handbrake off a business if you can get in there and sort some of the stuff out that's usually in the too hard basket.
And so how did you get from sort of doing all these, bits and pieces? You talked about your interest in environmental things. How did you get from there to actually where you've been working? You've got a non-profit that you're involved in, number of other businesses, but also you're now chief executive at CarbonClick. So how did you land where you are now?
Yeah, so I guess I reached a point in my life. I was about to have my son, which was a bit of a wake-up call for me. And I had a good exit and decided, right, this is probably time to rethink what I want to do for the rest of my life. And can I give back something? Because I felt like I'd done, quite well, and there'd probably been a bit of luck involved along the way. So I thought, if I put some time and money into a charity, that would be great. I couldn't find one that was running efficiently enough that it didn't piss me off. And what I didn't like was, donating to a cause where most of it gets absorbed in administration. That just, really racked me up. So as did, I really cared for the environment. I spent a lot of time on the water, fishing and diving, and particularly outside of New Zealand, the amount of plastics in the water was just a bit of a shocker. But also in New Zealand, it was getting worse and worse. So that was kind of the birth of Sea Cleaners. I joined up with some others. Sir Bob Harvey was, the guy that actually pulled us all together. And so we set that up and grew that over a few years to 10 boats operating full time, taking corporates and school kids out to see the impact, collect the plastics and bring it back. And, by the time I exited Sea Cleaners, we'd collectively pulled out 200 shipping containers full of rubbish from the seas around, or from the oceans around New Zealand.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
And was there a technological aspect to doing that work as well? As there been able to be a lot of innovation? Because I've seen some little, bits and pieces that seem to be coming through. But
and Sustainable Coastlines did a really good data collection project where they used technology to start getting some of the science behind how bad is the problem, where is it worse, and all of that. And that's really cool. But we didn't quite get to that stage. Although, I support all the groups that are doing this kind of thing. It wasn't, we're all in this together. But that charitable side of things really gave me a lot of sense of purpose in life, and I really enjoyed that. I started investing, deciding to angel invest in particularly clean tech. So who can I throw money at that will help solve the problem that I might also get a financial return out of, cutting plastic out of consumer goods. Companies like Ethique that, they take shampoo in a plastic bottle that weighs lots and creates lots of emissions and has lots of waste, and they put it into a little bar, like a shampoo bar, a conditioner bar, and so on, wrapped in cardboard. So it's super easy, no plastic, no fish were harmed in the making of this commercial kind of thing. So that's what I started investing in is companies that would do great things. And then I started getting interested in climate science. And along that journey, I thought plastic was the biggest problem. Single-use plastic was the biggest problem humanity faced, until I realized what was happening with the climate. And it took a lot of reading and a lot of research before I actually believed it, because there were so many conflicting arguments, all from qualified scientists. Some of them might have been funded by the oil companies and some of them, not funded at all. But I didn't know who to listen to. I didn't know if the oil companies were being honest or dishonest or what the story was. So I took it on my own back to research that, and it took me about a year.
Wow! How do you research and get your head around climate change?
Well, I thought, what's the source document that everybody's arguing about when it comes to political campaigns and who's going to sign on to the Paris Agreement and things like that? And it all came down to this agreement. A 1,500-page document, roughly, by somebody, a group called the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This is thousands of scientists collectively putting data into this system and working out what's happening and trying to understand climate change really, and what are the drivers for it. And there were bits that didn't make sense and bits that they didn't understand, but bits that were really obvious as well. So I had to filter all the information into, okay, what is definite that we do know, or at least really high probability, can see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And from that, this was kind of going back 5 years. From that, I deduced that we got two options, right? We can not act and hope that they're wrong, or we can act and hope that they're wrong. But if they're right and we haven't acted, then we've really, said no to a possibly the last opportunity that we have to fix this, because there's a bit of a domino effect, right? And when you think of the really simple science behind climate change, the sun is what drives all the heat and all the energy that comes onto the earth. And if we have lots of white surface, like the snow, polar ice caps, reflects a lot of heat out. Cloud reflects a lot of heat out. But a cloud also insulates as well. So it's a bit of a 50-50 kind of story there. But if those polar ice caps melt and the sun is heating dark terrain, then it's almost too difficult to get rid of that heat again. So you enter this cycle where that's what happens when sea levels rise and all that sort of thing. So we're melting basically all these ice sheets and things. And as those who have studied any science might know, if you melt ice, it doesn't create any sea level change at all if the ice is floating on the water. It's the same mass displacement. However, if you melt ice that's on land, it does. And the ice melts at the sea level first and rises up to this problem. And so we're seeing this now. We're seeing minute amounts of sea level rise at the moment. It's barely noticeable. You are seeing climate change though. But soon you'll see that sea level rise ramp up as well. And at that point, it's too late to do anything about it, other than a bunch of scientists saying, we told you so. So that's what spurred me into thinking, well, I need to invest in climate tech because I've got to do something about this, and I'm in a position to do something about it. I've got time on my hands, a little bit of spare cash. Let's see who's trying to fix this and how, and what I can do better to not cause part of that problem. And the two of my co-founders from CarbonClick were pitching at a accelerator event. They're just a centrality run accelerator, and I watched the pitch and I thought, this is bloody good. This is some guys that have got some experience with an international airline on their carbon offsetting platform, learning about why customers do and don't click that little green button to offset their flight. And a lot of it was around trust and transparency and thinking that the airline might be just trying to make more money out of them. That wasn't the case, but it's that perception is everything, right? And if they don't understand where that money is going and can't see that transparently that it's happened, that distrust prevents them from actually parting with their hard-earned couple of dollars to make that flight carbon neutral. So this was the birth of CarbonClick, was to address all of that using technology to make it simple, meaningful, and transparent. And I was just going to invest and back them, but we couldn't find a good CEO to be able to run that course. So I said, I don't mind stepping in for a short period of time if that's what it takes to get this up and going. And they sort of welcomed me on board as a co-founder. And
this was 2019.
Yeah, 2019, and then of course, we started building out this platform, got some other investors on board as well, and had basically pre-sales from airport and airline customers before we'd even built the product. So I was thinking, this is just great. This is a success story that's going to ramp up really quickly. Then COVID hit, and all the airline market just went hiding.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
There weren't too many people flying at that stage, were there?
No, well, certainly nobody in New Zealand was flying, well, not outside of New Zealand at least. But also the airlines were laying off all their staff, the airports were doing the same, and certainly weren't looking at investing any money or time into carbon offset programs or anything that's not, critical to keeping the wheels on.
Right. So when we look at CarbonClick, what most people probably would think of in relation to you as going online to buy an airline ticket and then having an option that comes up on the screen for you to do an offset of that flight in terms of carbon credits. So yeah, that would have been a pretty tough period, and that was pretty much like most of your business at that point was the flight offsetting.
That was the whole business. That was the intention, is
so
tackle the airline market first, and then within the next few years expand out into the wider e-commerce sector, and then longer term compliance markets and things like that. But it certainly turned our opportunities upside down.
So what did you come in? You talked about selling before you actually had a product. So, what did that look like in terms of building up a team and putting the software and all the bits and pieces together so that you could, have something to serve your, I guess your clients are sort of, they partner with you, but it ends up being their customers that are the ones that are, ultimately, buying through you. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's right. So B2B2C. So we're providing or curating carbon offset programs for companies to offer their customers. And we're just the tech behind the scenes that makes it all happen for them. But we also have all the humans that do all the sense checking, make sure they're not going to go out there and do silly things like be greenwashing and get accused of that. So we're pretty responsible about making sure that we're working with the right businesses, that it's the right time for them to be offsetting, and the way that they do it doesn't stop them from leading by decarbonising first, or at least doing everything that they can to decarbonise first, because that's really important. We don't have enough offsets in the world to just offset alone and offset our way out of this problem. It has to be offsets are a really quick way of fighting climate change now, if we're also working on the other end of, turning the tap off on the bath as well as plugging it, or as well as letting the plug out rather. We've got to turn those taps off as well. Otherwise, we just can't keep up with the amount of damage that we're doing.
Right. And so what were the clients that you were able to get on board initially, and how's that evolved?
Yeah, so flipping from intending on working directly with the airlines first, we flipped into or pivoted into the wider e-commerce space. So we started with Shopify and then built out into WooCommerce, Magento, online e-commerce platforms where you'll see, probably 75% of the world's e-commerce is transacted through these platforms. And so 75% of the world's non-Amazon e-commerce. Should qualify that. And so that was great. Like, we got over 1,000 clients on board pretty quickly, putting the green button on their cart and seeing the carbon offsetting being clicked by their consumers, and getting some data around that so that we could start to understand what types of products people associate with carbon, and what types of companies people associate with that, and geographically where people were more active in carbon offsetting and so on. So that sort of helped. Even though it was lots of small businesses, it gave us really good data that we could work with to target the bigger companies, and the enterprises is really where we play best.
Oh, that's quite fascinating. And so what's your mix sort of look like today? Airlines versus, other sorts of, what is sort of the mix of entities that you work with?
Yeah, so travel sector is a big part of our core market. So that's airlines, hotels, and booking platforms that are in that tourism space. That's probably a third of our business. A third of our business would be in the wider e-commerce space, particularly fashion, health, and beauty. And then a third is a mix of direct offsetting, so businesses that actually want to tap into our platform to buy carbon, to go carbon neutral, and understand their carbon footprint. That's a part of it, but also an increasing part of that middle chunk is the event space. So, we just offset FIFA last year. That's a B2B side of things, but we've got, really big events customer coming on board shortly. That's one of the biggest events in the world, where their fans are aware that there's a carbon footprint attending and want to do something about it, still want to attend though. So this way they can offset their impact in a meaningful way and transparent way, and still attend that event.
And in terms of making it meaningful and transparent, how does technology help? What does that look like? And what's the role of technology and people and process for you to actually deliver that?
Yeah, so we use, the whole platform is a bit like Xero. It's kind of a financial and inventory management system with a full audit trail, and that goes all the way to the carbon offset registries, which is where carbon offset projects are listed. So you can see that CarbonClick has bought that module of carbon or a ton of carbon, and then there's an independent registry as well, which we run, which is a transparent ledger. It's anonymized, so you can see every transaction against each ton of carbon. So you can see where your $2 has gone transparently, instantly, and that it's been accounted for at the registry, whether it's United Nations or New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme registry, wherever that is. You can trace your money to see that it's reached the project, but more so you can actually learn about the project because we provide all the data, our audit reports, so that you can see that these are all the things that we've checked for that we like about this project.
Yep.
And that's really important in the carbon side of things, because you've got plenty of projects out there which are questionable as far as their additionality, their permanence. If we support this project, does it really have a big impact in sucking carbon out of the atmosphere or changing how much carbon is in the atmosphere? And if the answer is no, we won't support it. And so a third of all the projects that we assess, actually, we say, no, this is really bad. A third of the projects that we assess, we say it's questionable. We can't prove it or disprove it. But a third of them are really good, really meaningful, carry lots of co-benefits, biodiversity enhancements and things like that. And that helps all sorts of other areas of the world, like, if you have good native forestry leading up to streams and things that prevents silt runoff into the streams and out to sea and doesn't choke all the seagrass, and then that means all the snapper come in to spawn and I can go fishing and all of those kind of cool things. But really, that's what we're trying to do, is just restore our planet, and the carbon side of the equation is a big part of that.
That's great. And how easy is it for businesses who are, wanting to get their head around where they're at, how much of a problem they are, and looking at addressing it through carbon offsets?
So the basics are really simple. Like, there are plenty of free calculators out there that they can go on, punch in their details, how much energy am I consuming, and those sort of things. And they can tell from their provider whether that's carbon neutral energy or whether it's normal energy on the New Zealand grid. And there are factors for all of these things, which will give you a pretty good ballpark as to what your impact is. It doesn't factor in things like, peak hour. When the gas turbines are running, you're using dirtier energy and that sort of thing. Most EV owners start to learn about this because they buy an EV because they generally want to have a better impact on the planet, so they're generally charging at night and that sort of thing. But for the everyday business, you can get probably 75% of the way to a carbon footprint with a really basic calculator tool. And that gives you a really good idea as to where you can focus on decarbonising, and then you can take the next step later and work your way up to full carbon audits, ISO audits, and so on, if you really want to get deep into the calculations. But most businesses need to start somewhere, and it's perfectly okay to start with the basics and just look at where your biggest carbon savings could be first. Yep. And then keep refining and doing better from there.
Right. So if someone's got, they've gone through that process, I mean, are you able to work with sort of, what sort of size and scale of businesses do you work with who are looking at that just straight on that pure sort of business to business type relationship?
Absolutely. So we'll work with, on a direct and focused level, we'll work with the biggest enterprises in town. But at a platform level, we've got online free calculator tools and so on that SMEs can log into, have a play with, buy carbon at the end of it if they want to, and know that it's from a really reputable basket of carbon, and it's automated so that you're buying carbon locally to you, or a basket that's local to your to where you're logging in from. So, Kiwis are quite patriotic. They love supporting native reforestation projects in New Zealand and so on. That's what we use with customers like AA Smart Fuels. But, and Americans are the same in the US. They love supporting projects there. But we've found some regions like the UK, they're happy to support the Amazon and so on. So we've got a basket for every country, basically, and going online to buy carbon through our portal, you'll get the right basket that's going to hopefully be most meaningful to you without having to have high margins or any fees for interacting with a human. But when we get to the bigger end of town, they always want a curated basket that's carefully selected directly for them, but they're talking $1 million kind of offset volumes.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. Now, sort of just, I guess, looking back on the journey, so far with CarbonClick, and you're about to go out and do a fundraising round. Is that right?
Yeah.
So coming up?
This is my last day of doing this kind of thing, and tomorrow I'll be into doing the reach out and pitch process for investors for our Series A.
Oh, that's exciting. But looking back over these past sort of, I guess 3.5, 4 years that you've been involved in CarbonClick, you talked about COVID and how that really put you under an immense lot of pressure, because you're expecting to be selling largely to airlines and the travel sector. What are the the big challenges that you've had and the lessons that you've learned sort of during this this window of time?
Yeah, the biggest challenge that I had was dealing with the stress management, and having the rug swept out from underneath you with something like COVID was something we all had to deal with. And I'm not unique in saying that I had to deal with this. Everybody on your show has had to come up with their own coping mechanisms, and a lot of the businesses failed. And that was an option for us as well. You know, we were very seriously considering, do we shut the doors, give investors back the change of what's left in there, and put the IP on pause until this is all over? You know, are we going to be climbing a brick wall that's so tall that it's just blowing their money instead of returning that investment? Because investors, you know, they're concerned on either mitigating losses or maximizing investment, and we've got to make those calls all the time. What's in their best interest? What's in the company's best interest? Because when you co-found a business, it's your baby, and often that leads you to making bad decisions because you're so desperate to get that baby to survive. Sometimes that's where innovation comes from, though, as well. And in our case, we had a really cohesive team that were prepared to do, you know, we were doing 70, 80-hour weeks. The big learning that I had from that was we got caught in that rut of staying in that 80-hour week kind of mentality. And all that happens after a while is that you're working burnt out, you're less productive, you're not thinking clearly, and you get stuck in a rut or a routine that you're not actually achieving anything except for, you know, wrecking your own health. So that was kind of one of those learnings that I had as a leader, is knowing that I had to recognize those signs of fatigue in the team. And, you know, I should have made some judgment calls earlier to pull them out of that hole, and pull myself out of there first, and try and get everybody to see the helicopter view a little better.
Yeah, that's pretty hard when, you know, you're just working to survive, right? And that you know, puts you under all sorts of pressure, and you don't necessarily have the clarity that might come later in hindsight.
Yeah, that's right. And I think getting that mindset, eventually I got it, that failure is an option as long as we fail fast. So I had to take myself up a notch and say, right, all the cards on the table. Where are we going? Where are the big opportunities? Where is the money going to come in? And are the investors going to back us into that plan? Because sitting here trying to do more of what's not working very well is probably never going to be a sustainable strategy moving forward. And, you know, ironic for a sustainability focused business that we're not operating sustainably as a team when it comes to our own human resource. It's really wise to figure these things out, but it can take some time, right? Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've come through that. What sort of hours are you and the team having to work these days? Are you a bit more realistic? Yeah, it's more realistic, and you know, it's somewhere between 40 to 50 hours, but it's generally a case of what you put into the hours rather than the hours. I try and remind myself of that all the time. Is what I'm doing, making the boat go faster, so to speak. And with my team as well, you know, I don't mind what time you clock in and clock out. What I mind is the ROI that we're getting for your time. And that's the most important thing. Some things, you know, are a bit monotonous and they do take a bit of time, especially when it comes to developing and coding and things like that. But there are some things also where we realize we're dealing with some clients that are a bit of a waste of time. You know, you should be spending the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your time on the top 20% of your clients, because that's where all your development will go. That's where all of your success will come from. Yep, it's easy to get caught up in those sort of scenarios, and at times it just makes sense to cut them loose, doesn't it? Even, you know, there's scenarios whereby which you can spend, you know, so much time, you know, on a particular client or a particular situation that actually doesn't align with where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do, and in fact it takes you in completely the opposite direction. But it's really hard to do that when
that's bringing in, some of the money that's kind of keeping you going. So have you had to go through and do that to a degree?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all got an ego and a bit of tunnel vision. We make a decision and we back ourselves in that decision, whether that's to accept a client or a project. We're pretty slow to say, actually, guys, this is probably not going to work. And it was a bit of a cock up for us to take this project on. We're really sorry.
Yeah.
We're going to politely walk away from it. That's, that takes a lot of balls, especially when there's money on the table. But sometimes it's a case of, hey, if I reprioritize that investment that I thought was only going to be a 40-hour project, now that I know it's going to be another 160 hours and it's probably not looking so economic, shall I cut the umbilical cord and redirect that 160 hours into something more meaningful, something more scalable? And those are the judgment calls that we have to make sometimes, and write off the bad money that the bad time that we've actually invested in something that we misjudged.
Yeah. And so does that always come back to you to make those calls?
Often it does, and it is heartbreaking when you've especially when the team is excited about something, and then you realise that there's so much scope creep that there's been a mistake made along the way, and we've got to be honest about that, guys. The customer can be brought into those meetings and say, look, this is a problem that we need to address. It's actually going to cost this much, and we can't afford to do it at the price that we quoted. We don't even know if it's economically viable to do that project now for you, because you're going to need a return on your investment as well. Is it worth it for you? And it's good just to have those honest conversations, I guess. And that's missing in business a lot.
Yeah, look, I think when you're doing new things and you are at the the cutting edge, as it were, reality is there are things you're not going to know up front in each and every case. It's not just cookie cutter, right? So
No.
you were going to be taking those risks, and I think probably it's in many ways it's fairly normal, particularly the way business does move so quickly these days, that we're all going to come across these types of scenarios. So yeah, it's good to hear that reality, and a reminder to stop and think about those scenarios that are maybe not going to work out so well.
Yeah, and also when you're caught up and you get busy, and that example where a project gets blown out, that consumes, if you're going to try and do that project, it's going to take extra time when you've made other promises. So you're just going to become busier and busier, and then you don't have the bandwidth left to actually think clearly. And that's where I found meditating, even if it's only for 10 minutes every morning, meditating is a really good way to regroup, bring back some of that clarity, remind yourself what you're doing and why, and what are I use those, the 3 big rocks in a jar kind of analogy. Do we have the 3 big rocks in the jar under control? And is the sand and everything else getting in the way of those 3 big rocks? And very often it is, which brings me back to empty the other stuff out and focus on what's going to really make a big difference, what's going to shift the dial for CarbonClick or for any business.
That's great. And I guess that there's an aspect in your business where, and it's probably reasonably common, I suppose, where trends change, and so I would think businesses generally would be more interested in how they can do the right thing from an environmental aspect, but probably carbon offsetting, some people are very keen, but it maybe isn't trendy in every direction. So how have you kind of dealt with that, whether carbon offsetting is the right thing to do? Has that been much of a challenge?
Yeah, it has been, because there's there are good companies that are decarbonising first, and there are good offsets that are highly meaningful. And those companies that are decarbonising first and measuring the carbon really accurately, generally they're happy to support those high quality projects as well. And that's a really meaningful loop. But then you've got bad companies that are offsetting with good offsets. That's a real conundrum because they're not necessarily decarbonising, so therefore it can be classed as greenwashing. So that's the cases where it's really sad that we have to say no, but we often can be that tail that wags the dog and say, hey, look, but come and see us in 6 months. Here's some pointers. You need to sort out your decarbonisation plan first and take some tangible steps first. Otherwise, the only reason that we're saying no is to protect your name and ours from being dragged over the coals for greenwashing by, offsetting your problem instead of tackling the main cause of your emissions. So there's that. There's also good companies that choose poor quality offsets, and those are really meaningless. So they're claiming net zero or climate friendly or carbon neutral, but the offsets that they're using to claim it with are not actually making a tangible difference to the atmosphere. So there's those companies that are trying to do good, but they're just buying poor quality offsets, and that's really unfortunate. But they often get hauled over the coals for that as well, and brought out in the media for greenwashing. And then you've got so you've got good companies buying good offsets, bad companies buying good offsets, and you've got good companies buying bad offsets. So there's only really one of those quadrants, good companies, good offsets, that really is where we want to play. And we have to support, the media, those that are getting hauled over the coals for it, but it doesn't do a lot of favors for carbon offsetting as an industry.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I'm a big advocate for regulation and increasing minimum standards. So I'm pretty vocal in that when we have, COP27 last year, COP26 before that. That's the United Nations event. On trying to advocate for those higher minimum standards to weed out at least the bad offsetting. And then it's a case of, consumer laws, like Europe's just passed some consumer laws recently on vague green claims. So companies won't be able to, for example, claim this is a carbon neutral t-shirt if they've used poisonous dyes and poor quality other environmental damaging things are involved in that process. So that's going to start to weed out the bad companies as well over time.
That's good. That sounds, that's very, very helpful. And so, what's next? You've got Series A sort of, funding round. Are there any details that you can share about that at this point in times in terms of what you're looking to raise?
So
valuations and so on.
It's just the starting point of that process. The first thing is to secure our lead investors. So to make sure lead and co-lead probably. We've got to trade a customer of ours that's probably going to be one of those co-leads, and finding another hero investor to take that other co-lead position is the first job, and because that sets the terms, and then everybody else is really investing on those terms. So we've got to secure what the valuations are and things like that. But we're the plan is to raise $10 million US on a $30 million pre-money. And that's based on comparative analysis with others in the same sort of position, same sort of revenues and all that sort of thing. But it's an unusual market at the moment.
Yeah, it is.
So we may need to rethink our strategy if we get 4 weeks in and investors are saying, hey, we're worth more or less. We're going to have to just adjust as we go. So a month in, we'll really know where it's sitting.
Yeah, I guess anyone raising funds at the moment sort of goes in with their eyes pretty wide open, but you don't really know how it plays out until you get in there, do you? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh well, I hope it goes really, really well. And in terms of sort of the the longer term, where do you imagine CarbonClick sort of, might be in, 5 years or so out?
Yeah, so I mean, the next stage is to get into the compliance market, which would probably be a post Series B phase. But this is part of the advantage of working with the large enterprises, is they're going to be the first captured by legislation that require them to meet certain thresholds. So that's kind of after in another 2 years, and then beyond that, in that 5-year journey, it'll be a case of bedding down that ramp up of green button on e-commerce, as well as customers buying carbon to meet those compliance requirements using our platform, and we'll build a lot of partnerships around this as well. We're not doing this alone, but the longer term game, by about 2030, which is kind of now 7 years out, that's we think we'll be at a kind of 2% of the world's voluntary carbon market. Plus, I'm not sure what percent of the compliance market, but the voluntary market alone's $50 billion market in 2030. So it's that'll be for this New Zealand company to be doing $1 billion a year in carbon revenue. That's a pretty big ambition, but we think it's entirely plausible. We're at 0.2% of the global carbon market at the moment, is our revenue share of that.
Yeah.
And all we need to do is 10x where we're at now as a market share percentage.
Make it sound easy. So
well, it should be. It should be.
Good.
It should be relatively straightforward.
Excellent. Oh, that's really good. Thank you, Dave, for joining the show, and great to learn about CarbonClick, gain some insights from your learnings along the way. For folks that may be interested in getting in touch or in learning a bit more, where should they head to? Yeah,
you can check out carbonclick.com. Connect with me if you want on LinkedIn, or you can access me via our website as well.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Dave Rouse, and thanks to our show partners, Vodafone, Spark, 2 Degrees, HP, and Gorilla Technology. All right. Catch you on the next episode.
Thanks.
See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.